You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McCroy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Singularity Blueprint, Quantifying the Soul. If you've been listening to this broadcast for any length of time, you have probably heard me say that essentially the technocrats and the dark occultists who run things above them in this world are doing their very best to quantify everything for purposes of control, because if you can quantify a thing, if you can measure a thing, that gives you some degree of control over that thing. And certainly, they seek to do that with human consciousness and the human soul. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, because you see, this is not just stuff that's been speculated at by this broadcaster and researcher and others. These are very real agendas that have been laid out in various places in this world. And tonight, we're going to actually look at a patent filing by one Dr. Alexander Bolonkin. And he began actually in earnest seeking to get this idea patented back in 2004. But after going through various hurdles and red tape, it was finally established, and the patent was granted in 2009, 5 years later. So think about this. This goes back over 20 years that the transhumanist scene was thinking about the very notion of quantifying the human soul. Because tonight we're going to read actually from this research paper that was submitted as part of the patent for the invention here. And he thought of real, actual ways to do this, to quantify the human soul. The title of the invention that he applied for the patent for is as follows: Method of recording and saving of human soul for human immortality and installation for it. That is the title of the patent here, and he had a lot of other writings that he had done as precursory steps into developing this type of technology. Now remember, this goes back to 2004. This was being developed. And who is this guy, this Dr. Alexander Bolonkin? Before we get into the patent filing and the research and development behind the patent, we're going to look at the background of this guy. Alexander Alexandrovich Bolonkin was a Russian-American scientist and academic who worked in the Soviet aviation, space, and rocket industries and lectured in Moscow universities before being arrested in 1972 by the KGB as a dissident. He served terms of imprisonment and exile for 15 years until 1987, when he emigrated to the U.S. as a political refugee. After that, he lectured at American universities and worked as a researcher at NASA, the U.S. Air Force, and for the National Research Council. He was a member of the board of directors of the International Space Agency, chairman of the Space Flights Section, member of the advisory board of the Lifeboat Foundation, and its Space Settlement Board, the founding president of the International Association of Former Soviet Political Prisoners and Victims of Communist Regime, and co-founder and co-chair of the board of directors of American Russian-Speaking Association for Civil and Human Rights. Gonna pause for a moment. So this guy was involved with various space programs throughout the course of his career. And you'll see where some of his specializations come into play here, because we're going to read a little bit more about him and understand how he came to be involved in this whole transhumanist ideology. Now, he was actually born in 1933 and died in December of 2020. So this guy seemed to have a lot of sway and influence in the technological world, in Russia at first, but then as a political dissident, he left there and emigrated here to America, where he was taken right into the fold in much the same way Operation Paperclip did things. Worked for NASA, worked for the United States Air Force. Doesn't that seem a little odd? This guy's coming from Russia, one of our avowed enemies at that time. And he came here, and they gave him all kinds of jobs working in these organizations that have national security potential risks involved with them. But yet, I'll digress on that point. Obviously, there was something deeper going on here. So, Bolonkin was born in a town called Perm. He got a higher secondary education in aviation engineering from Perm Aviation College, received his diploma in 1952. His higher education resulted in a master's degree in aviation engineering from Kazan Aviation Institute in 1958, a master's degree in mathematics from Kyiv University in 1963, a doctorate in aerospace engineering from the Moscow Aviation Institute in 1964, and a habilitated doctor degree in cybernetics and mathematics from Leningrad Polytechnic University in 1971. Gonna pause for a moment. Yes, this guy was a cyberneticist. And this is an important discipline to understand because it is the science of whole systems control. And it's a scientific discipline that crosses the bounds of other disciplines. So he had a lot of knowledge in the aerospace industry, and he also knew advanced mathematics and had also learned the discipline known as cybernetics, which is massively important in the modern era. In 1972, he was arrested by the KGB for dissemination of an underground dissident newsletter, listening to the Voice of America, and reading disseminating works by Andrei Sarharev and Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I hope I pronounced those names correctly. Bolonkin was sentenced to 4 years in a labor camp and 2 years in exile in Buryata. Shortly before his sentence of exile ended, Bolonkin was given a sentence of 2 years in a labor camp on a charge of stealing state property. For 15 years, he was tortured, imprisoned, and exiled in Mordovia and Siberia. In 1981, Sakharov appealed for international support to have him freed. In April 1982, he made a televised recantation that Amnesty International ascribed to threats of beatings and rape. In 1987, during the early perestroika, he was released and gained entry to the United States as a political refugee. In the United States, he has lectured at New Jersey Institute of Technology and worked at NASA as a senior researcher, and in the scientific laboratories of the U.S. Air Force as a senior research fellow of the National Research Council. He subsequently worked in Israel as chief scientist at the Strategic Solutions Technology Group. Gonna pause for a moment. This guy had ties all over the place, didn't he? Russia, the U.S., Israel. Seems like an unlikely pairing of all these things, but certainly here he was, highly degreed and respected in aerospace engineering and cybernetics and mathematics and all of these other things. Worked for various government agencies for multiple nations, apparently. And here we are. And we're going to get to the meat of the matter here. By 2009, Bolonkin held 17 patents. Among his innovations in space exploration are a cable space launcher, a hypersonic tube launcher, a kinetic anti-gravitation system, a multi-reflex propulsion device, space towers, an electrostatic solar sail, an electric ramjet space propulsion device, and the cable aviation device. In an interview in a magazine called Izvestia in 1998, he predicted the achievement of cybernetic immortality by 2020, and in 2011 he was consulted as an expert by the 2045 Initiative. Gonna pause for a moment. Have you heard of the 2045 Initiative? This is something that I actually covered many, many years ago in the very early phases of my public career here in broadcasting and writing. I covered this in some of my very early delvings into looking at these things. The 2045 initiative, you can find pieces and slides from this slideshow presentation online still. And it's interesting because this was ostensibly a Russian program. That's how they introduced it to the world, but it was international in scope, and it talked about achieving immortality by the year 2045 and changing man into a completely digital being. So this guy was one of the direct people involved in the 2045 initiative. It says he also developed the idea of domed cities as a protection against fallout, and in physics, he researched the production of what he called AB matter, AB matter, through what is known as femto technology. And if you're not familiar with what femto technology is, this is smaller scale technology than nanotechnology, and he was talking about this and working on this way back in the early 2000s, folks. Femto technology. So the state of technologies today within the auspices and bounds of the military-industrial complex are probably far in advance of what we suspect here on the surface level. So it mentions a bunch of the patents that this guy had, some really interesting ones that may be a subject for research some other day, but the one we're primarily concerned with is this one that we're going to be reading from. This was from his patent application. Like I said, he had initially submitted in 2004, but had to go through political red tape and the rigmarole and nonsense in the filing of the patent and go through all the headaches involved with that before they finally approved his patent request and granted it in 2009, 5 years later. So this is a real type of technology with a basis in his research here that was considered to be feasible at the time of the patent application here in 2004. So think about that. Keep that in mind. Over 20 years ago, this stuff was considered to be feasible. Now, when we get reading into this, you'll see how some of these technologies since that time in the public sector have gotten far more advanced than what they were in how he was referring to it here. So let's get right into it. So Alexander Bolonkin, patent application, submitted November 25th, 2004. And it titled, Method of Recording and Saving of Human Soul for Human Immortality and Installation for It. Cross-reference to related applications, and he shows a list of cross-applications here that he has regarding some of these ideas. And he puts a lot of references back to some of his own background work, some of the papers that he's produced concerning the topic here. Background of the invention. Number 1, field of the invention. The inventor shows that the human soul is only the information in the human brain. He offers a new method for rewriting the human brain on electronic chips. This method allows for the modeling of a human soul in order to achieve immortality. This method does not damage the brain, but works to extend and enhance it. Going to pause for a moment right after that. That's the opening phrase and sequence and idea behind this patent. You see, this guy, as well as others in the transhumanist field, believed and do believe that the human soul can be transferred to an electronic chip. Are you getting that? Now remember, this is over 20 years ago. they thought this was feasible. Let's read on. So number 2, the description of the related art. Immortality is the most cherished dream and the biggest wish of any person. People seldom think about it while they are still young, healthy, and full of energy. But when they get some incurable disease or become old, then there is no bigger wish for them than to live longer, put off the inevitable end. And no matter what heavenly existence in the afterlife is promised to them by religion, the vast majority of people want to stay and enjoy life here on Earth as long as possible. The inventor shows a real immortality can be only electronically achieved. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So now we're beginning to see the crux of the argument, and you thought virtual reality and all of this notion just seemed like science fiction. Well, this guy would have begged to differ with you. He thought it most certainly feasible. Let's read on. He says, medical science and the issue of immortality. A great many of doctors and scientists are currently working on the problems of health and longevity. Substantial means are spent on it, about 15 to 25% of all human labor and resources. There are certain achievements in this direction. We have created wonderful medications, for example, antibiotics, have conquered many diseases, and learned to transplant human organs, created an artificial heart, kidneys, lungs, limbs, learned to apply physiological solutions directly into the bloodstream, and to saturate blood with oxygen. We have gotten inside the most sacred organ, the human brain, even inside its cells. We can record their signals. We can agitate some parts of the brain by electric stimuli, inducing a patient to experience certain sensations, images, and hallucinations. I'm going to pause for a moment before we continue on. So now, back in 2004, Bolonkin was saying, we have been able to record the signals of the brain and the cells of the brain and achieve certain results through electrical stimulation of the brain, even to the point of causing a person to experience certain sensations, images, or hallucinations in this way. Now, is this all acknowledged in the mainstream, in the public realm of science? I certainly don't think that was the case way back in 2004 when he was filing this patent. He's probably referring to a lot of sciences that went on in the background quietly, being done by the military-industrial complex under such grants by organizations like DARPA, talking about this stuff. So he seems to indicate that they were a lot more sophisticated in what they were able to do, how they were able to actually read the signals of the brain and affect the brain with outside external electrical stimuli. Interesting. Let's continue. We can attribute the fact that the average lifespan has increased 2 times in the last 200 years to the achievements of modern medicine. But can medical science solve the problem of immortality? Evidently, it cannot. It cannot do that in principle. This is a dead-end direction in science. Maximum it can achieve is increasing the average life expectancy by another 5 to 10 years. An average person will be expected to live 80 years instead of 70. But what kind of person will it be? A very old one, capable of only existing and consuming, whose medical and personal care will demand huge funds. Gonna pause for a moment here. Now, are you beginning to sense this little bit of a eugenics-based idea inherent here as well? It's always there, ladies and gentlemen. You can always find this ideology mixed into all of these scientific advancements and studies put forward by these cyberneticists. They always imply the same things. So what Bolonkin is saying here, medical science is a dead end. He said, at best, it will only be able to maybe extend the human lifespan by another 5 to 10 years. And instead of the average life expectancy being 70, it'll be 80. And this was as of 2004 when he was saying this. So what is he proposing instead? Because you see, what he's saying here is even if we're able to do that, extend the human life expectancy by 10 years, well, they're the years at the end, aren't they? So he's arguing that people will be old and have many types of disabilities and ailments that they will be riddled with, and it will be very expensive to take care of them, and they won't be productive anymore. Like I said, you could always hear the subtle inclinations towards eugenics in the way that they propose these things. But let's go ahead and we'll read on. The proportion of the elderly and retirees has increased steeply in the last 20 to 30 years and continues to grow, depleting the pension funds and pressuring the younger generation to support them. So it is hard to say whether the modern success of medicine is a blessing or a curse from the point of view of the entire humankind, even though it is definitely a blessing from the point of view of a separate individual. Going to pause for a moment here. So notice he's implying that maybe the greater good is not better off by having these extended lifespans because it puts a burden on the younger generations. Once again, you can hear the subtle implications of eugenics in his writings. Let's continue. Humanity as a whole, as a civilization, needs active, able-to-work, and creative members, generating material wealth and moving forward technology and science, not the elderly retirees with their numerous ailments and a huge army of those tending to them. It dreams not of the immortality of an old person, but of the immortality of youthfulness, activity, creativity, and enjoying life. I'm going to pause for a moment here. So I don't think I could make it any more clear for you what this guy's attitude was towards this notion of medically extending human life. You see, he had a very poor opinion of it. He thought it would be too costly and non-productive, and it would use up valuable resources. Because he makes the argument here, not only do you have these old retirees having to deal with their medical issues, but then you have this huge army of those who have to provide the medical care to them. And in his view, it seems to be a waste of resources that we should be focusing on productivity, pushing forward science and technology and generating more material wealth, rather than just being a useless eater, to use the phraseology popular among the elitists. That's how they view us, and especially those that they consider to be of this generation of retirees, the older people. They view them as being not productive anymore, a burden on society. So like I said, you could hear the implications of eugenics in this guy's writings. But let's go ahead and continue reading here, because we'll see what he's proposing here instead. Now there are signs of a breakthrough, but not in the direction the humankind has been working on all along, since the time of the first sorcerers to modern-day highly educated doctors. Striving to prolong his biological existence, man has been chiseling, so to speak, at the endless stone wall. All he has been able to accomplish is only a dent in that wall, increased life expectancy, conquering some diseases, relieving suffering. As a payoff, the humanity has received a huge army of pensioners and retirees and gigantic expenditures on their upkeep. Of course, one can continue chiseling at the dent in the wall further on, making it somewhat bigger, aggravating more side effects. But we are already approaching the biological limit, when the cause of death and feeble-mindedness is not a certain disease which can be conquered, but general deterioration of the entire organism. It's decay on the cellular level, when the cells stop dividing. A live cell is a very complex biological formation. In its nucleus, it has DNA, biological molecules consisting of tens of thousands of atoms connected between themselves with very fragile molecular links. Suffice it to say that temperature fluctuation of only a few degrees can ruin these links. That is why a human organism maintains a certain body temperature. Raising this temperature only 2 to 3 degrees causes pain, and 5 to 7 degrees leads to death. Maintaining the existence of human cells also presents a big problem for humanity involving food, shelter, clothes, and ecologically clean environments. Nevertheless, human cells cannot exist eternally, even under ideal conditions. This follows from the atomic molecular theory. Atoms of biological molecules permanently oscillate and interact with each other. According to the theory of probability, sooner or later the impulses of adjacent atoms influencing the given atom add up, and the atom acquires enough speed to break loose from its atomic chain, or at least to transfer into the adjacent position. And he says in parentheses, physicists say that the impulse received by the atom has surpassed the energy threshold, which retains the atom in its particular place in the molecular chain. It also means that the cell containing this atom has been damaged and cannot any longer function normally. Thus, for example, we get cancer cells which cannot fulfill their designated functions anymore and begin to proliferate abnormally fast and ruin human organs. So I'm going to pause for a moment. So now this guy is arguing on the basis of physics that at some point things break down. And he's not wrong. We see this. Things break down over the course of time. So he's saying we're almost near the absolute limit to what we could achieve as far as longevity in the biological means. And that's the argument he's going with. So what else does he propose? Let's read on. This process accelerates manifold when a person has been exposed to a strong electromagnetic radiation. For instance, Röntgen or X-rays, a high-frequency electric current, or radioactive materials. Actually, the process of deforming of the hereditary DNA molecule under the influence of weak cosmic rays can take place from time to time, leading sometimes to birth defects, or it may turn out to be useful for the survival properties. And this plays a positive role for a particular species of plants or animals, contributing to their adaptability to the changed environment and their survival as a species. But for a particular individual, such aberration is a tragedy, as a rule, since the overwhelming majority of such cases are birth defects, with only few cases of useful mutations, and human society in general is suspicious of people who are radically different in their looks or abilities. So I'm going to pause for a moment here before we continue further. So now he's making arguments against this medical approach to extending the human lifespan. He's saying we are almost at the point where we've reached the biological limit of longevity, and that certain environmental factors oftentimes cause further decay of the DNA, cause mutations which are mostly harmful, at least to the individual. And he suspects that it's a dead end, looking at biology and medical applications for extending human life or achieving immortality. That's what he's on about here. He's more interested in achieving or attaining immortality in a physical sense in this world, rather than extending years of life. So he says that this medical model that we follow is a wasted expenditure. Let's put it that way. He's suggesting that this is the wrong direction to go for trying to achieve human immortality and to overcome things like death and disease. So what's he suggesting instead? Well, I think he lays it out here in the next portion. A brief summary of the invention. The inventor shows that a human soul is only the information in the human brain. He offers a method for rewriting the human brain on electronic chips. This method allows for the modeling of a human soul in order to achieve immortality. This method does not damage the brain, but works to extend and enhance it. This method of writing and saving of human souls includes: number 1, writing of views which the person sees during his life by a micro video recorder to a portable memory, a writing of sounds which the person speaks and hears by a microphone, the writing of a person's physical conditions by microsensors, writing of times and dates, and writing of the person's body position, etc. An installation used the method comprising devices: portable memory located at a person's body, a computer chip for data processing located at the person's body and connected to the portable memory, a micro camcorder or a micro video camera for writing of life, film located at the person's body and connected to the computer and to the portable memory, microphone for writing all the sounds which the person speaks and hears located at the person's body and connected to said computer and to said portable memory, microsensors for writing of person's physical conditions located at the person's body and connected to the computer and to the portable memory, a micro clock for the writing of the times located at the person's body and connected to the computer and also to the portable memory, microsensors for writing of the person's body positions located at the person's body and connected to the computer and to the portable memory, long-time memory, high-capability storage. The writing of the human soul is absolutely new in the idea of modeling, rewriting, and saving of the human soul, and using it for personal immortality. It says there are many materials about this method and installation. And next it gives a brief description of some of the drawings that it gives here. So, before we proceed any further, let's break this down. So, he's arguing a micro camcorder, that's how he referred to it back then, can be installed on the person, a microphone, some type of a long-term storage memory. All of these things back in 2004 didn't seem like they would be practical in any way, shape, or form. But fast forward 20 years, 20 plus years, and it sounds to me like this can most easily be achieved. Wouldn't be too much of a problem to maybe attach an audio-video device to a person's body or person and to record all this data, to record all of their bodily functions, the data from that. We have sensors and stuff that do that stuff now, wearable sensors. Think of your Fitbit watch. Think of your Apple Watch. It measures your heart rate, measures your body temperature, measures your blood pressure, can notice spikes and jumps in your blood pressure, and make connections to perhaps your stress level or some such thing. Plus, it records everything you see and hear. It's got a long-term memory storage capacity to it, and that was one of the functions that he placed a lot of emphasis on. So it's feasible to record this information. Now, he argues that much of this information is the only thing that comprises a soul, and that it's only this information that's stored in the brain that comprises a human soul. Now, we'll see here as we get a little further into this patent application and some of his writings that he uses to back this up. We'll see what his reasoning for thinking this is. But we'll also notice that all of these things, even though back in 2004 when he applied for this patent seemed highly impractical or unwieldy, well, now these things are very feasible, and in fact, you're carrying it in your pocket. The cell phone. If you could have a connection with your cell phone to, say, I don't know, a video recorder, like Google Glasses. Do you remember the Google Glasses? Recording everything you see and hear. It all seems a lot more feasible now, doesn't it? But let's get to his description of the drawings. He has a principal scheme of the installation of equipment of writing the human soul, which is full information about human life for man's immortality. And he says the cells to this contain micro devices, which would be micro video cameras, microphones, computer chips, portable recorders, portable power sources, portable memory, etc. Micro sensors and devices for writing of brain impulses, oscillation, fluctuation, and a state of man's health in the personal physical conditions. For example, sensors of blood pressure, heart palpitations, skin resistance, perspiration, skin temperature, respiration activity, mouth watering, chills, rigor-like tremors, muscle stress, blood mixture, pain, brain oscillation, and so on. So he's talking about the recording of brain waves and other physiological aspects that they measure for human health. This all being recorded. Think about that with these microsensors. Now, like I said, back in 2004, that probably seemed very impractical to have any type of a device like this. It would be far too clunky to hook to a human being. Now we have those very things. Next, he says microsensors for writing of body positions, for example, sensors of motion, acceleration, distance, angle, mutual position, and so on. Devices for measure of the outer environmental conditions about the man, such as air temperature, pressure, humidity, gas composition, smells, wind, illumination, radiation, and so on. Devices of a portable navigation system for measure of a person's position at the Earth's surface, for example, GPS navigation system. I'm going to pause for a moment again here, folks. Now think back, 2004, GPS was still not really as sophisticated as it is today, but he was talking about this, and it didn't seem something that would be practical for a human being to actually be able to have attached to their body somehow, or in close proximity to their body at all times. But like I alluded to earlier, you're carrying that device in your pocket right now. And you might have some wearable devices that attach directly to that. This is not out of the realm of possibility. The next thing he mentions here is emergency 911 communication. Like I said, we're carrying that in our pocket, aren't we? And lastly here, he says a portable power source, for example, chemical, solar, nuclear batteries, and so on, rewriting the information from the portable memory to the high-capability long-term storage. And he says, for the location, in one of the notes here, of the video camera, this would be at the human head, and he specifies more particularly the forehead. The forehead. Now, what does this tell us? Do they, at some point, intend to install some type of an electronic camera device in your forehead? Maybe something akin to a computer chip that has video capabilities. Sounds like the mark of the beast, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Introduced here in this patent. Now, this next portion here says it gives a detailed description of the innovation. a brief description of previous works by the inventor. Now he's going to touch on some of the things he's talked about in the past and has put together in various research papers that he has as attachments to this initial patent filing. In a series of articles that are referenced in a list at the end of the invention patent here, the inventor shows that the purpose of the nature of it is to create super intelligence. With its ability to understand the universe, advanced entities with super intelligence power will be able to survive major cataclysms. There is what's known as the law of increasing complexity in opposition to the laws of entropy, which is increasing chaos, which he was referring to earlier, as to what it is that this biological function of the human being gives us in the medical model. This law, the law of increasing complexity, created biological intelligence, people. Humans have since become a sovereign entity on the earth and in nature above all other creatures. So now, in this next portion of the patent filing and his research, he introduces you to what is his solution to this problem of us actually approaching the limits of our biology. Electronic immortality, the advantages of electronic existence. In the noted works, the author has shown that the problem of immortality can be solved only by changing the biological human into an artificial form. Such an immortal person made of chips and super-solid materials, which he called the E-Man in some of his articles, will have incredible advantages in comparison to conventional people. An E-Man will need no food, no dwelling, no air, no sleep, no rest, and no ecologically pure environment. His brain will work from radioisotopic batteries, which will work for decades, and muscles that will work on small nuclear engines. Such a being will be able to travel into space and walk on the seafloor with no aqua lungs. He will change his face and figure. He will have superhuman strength and communicate easily over long distances to gain vast amounts of knowledge in seconds by rewriting his brain. His mental abilities and capacities will increase millions of times. It will be possible for such a person to travel huge distances at the speed of light. The information of one person like this could be transported to other planets with a laser beam and then placed in a new body. Such people will not be awkward robots as in the movies. An artificial person will have the opportunity to choose his or her face, body, and skin. It will also be possible for them to reproduce and then avoid any period of adolescence, including the need for education. It will be impossible to destroy this entity with any kind of weapons, since it will be possible to copy the information of their minds and then keep such information backed up in separate distant locations. As was written in the science fiction book The Price of Immortality by Igor Getmansky, written in 2003 in Russian. An artificial person will have all of these superhuman abilities. Gonna pause for a moment here. Now this is certainly what the transhumanists are on about. They seem to think that this is feasible and possible. Man can transcend his current biological limitations and become a superman or a super intelligence and live forever as information. That's essentially what this is saying. Now, the next section here asks, what are men and intelligent beings? And now he's making his arguments here. All intelligent creatures have two main components. Component number one, information about their environment, about their experience of interacting with nature, people, society, etc., which he calls the soul. So he says this information is the soul. And number 2, a capsule or shell, it says in parentheses here, where this information is located, which would be the biological brain and body. The capsule or shell supports existence and stores information and programs for all of its operations. The capsule or shell also allows the creature to acquire different sensory information through eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and touch, and it moves to different locations in order to interact with the environment. Gonna pause for a moment here. So the capsule or shell, and of course he had to use the word shell in parentheses here, and this has a larger esoteric meaning. You see, to the Kabbalists and the Hermeticists, the world of shells is a real potential possibility. Here it is a world devoid of spirit, devoid of the divine spark of God, simply a world of containers. The dead entity, Michael Hoffman calls it the reign of dead matter that is the world of shells, that many of these dark occultists at the top of the power structure in this world seek to achieve. Was also referred to by Rudolf Steiner as the spirit of Ahriman. This push towards gross materiality, disregarding any spiritual concerns, eliminating spirit from the physical. That's what this is seeking to do, if you want to look at it from the esoteric or spiritual side of things. And that's exactly what this guy is talking about. If they could convince you that your soul is nothing more than information, then it can be rewritten on a computer chip and you can live forever. If it's only data, and it's only information, if you, the ontological self, is nothing more than information, then that can be transferred to a new container or shell. But it's all a lie, folks. It's all based on the great lie from the Garden of Eden: you can be as gods. I'll leave it for you to draw your own conclusions about this stuff, but this is what is put down in writing. This is a literal patent that exists in the world today, and this is the language directly from that patent. And like I've told you before, transhumanism is the big conspiracy going on today. It's the granddaddy of all conspiracies in this world, and it most certainly is the big thing going on. And no matter what bit of research you do into any of these conspiratorial type concepts, what they call conspiratorial concepts, or conspiracy theories in mass media, any avenue of exploration you take into any of these areas of study, you will always invariably land in two places. First and foremost, you will find the occult. And secondly, you will also find the transhumanist singularity as the fulfillment of these occult doctrines. It's always there. It's ever present. It permeates all of these various areas of research. But let's get back to reading from the patent application here. He says, the main component of an intelligent being is information, and he says in parentheses, soul. So the soul. The experiences and knowledge accumulated in the soul allows the entity to interact more efficiently in nature in order to survive. If the being has more information and better operational programs or the ability to find good solutions, then it is more likely to thrive. For an intelligent being to save its soul, it must solve the problem of individual immortality. Currently, man creates a soul for himself by acquiring knowledge from parents, educational systems, employment, and life experiences. Gonna pause for a moment here. So now, he's hinting at some things that have been talked about in many of the occult fraternities. He's saying man creates a soul for himself. by the process of acquiring knowledge from parents, education systems, employment, life experiences, etc., that man builds his soul. Now, the original intention of such a thing was actually a positive when regarded by the ancient alchemists, that man can build himself a soul. He can build towards something beautiful, something that transcends, transfigures this reality, something spiritual. Now, they've taken and inverted that whole idea, turned it on its head, and applied it as a strictly physical thing here. That's what's been done. So this whole notion of building one's soul now consists of recording data. Hyper-physical data. Do you see how the inversion process and the inversion principle is just very subtly applied in this way to make you think in that direction? That's the direction that these transhumanists think in. So the author goes on here and he says, when he dies, most knowledge is lost except for a very small part, which is left through works, children, and apprentices. Billions of people have lived on Earth. However, we know comparatively little about ancient history. Only after the invention of written language did people have the capacity to easily save knowledge and pass it on to the next generation. As discussed earlier, the biological storage, the human brain, of our soul, the information, is unreliable. Gonna pause for a moment here. So now you could see the hubris setting in, not just of this Bolonkin fellow, but also cyberneticists and transhumanists altogether. They think they can build a better man. They think they can build a better world than our Creator here. They think the human being is inherently flawed, that the human body is inherently flawed. It is the most miraculous machine and most complex machine on the face of the earth, if you want to look at it from the perspective of these machinists or these cyberneticists. They still don't fully comprehend or understand its workings, and they probably never will. But they try to make approximations, and how do they do that? By attempting to quantify things. You've heard me say it before. If you can quantify a thing, that gives you some measure of control over that thing, whether it's an imprecise measure or not. It gives you some type of a generalized way of steering or directing a thing. If you can weigh, measure, or count a thing, quantify it in some way. That is the methodology that is known as cybernetics, and that is what they seek to do, and that is why they are attempting to quantify what is the soul. Well, if they claim they can do that, then it gives them a measure of control over this soul. Now think about that. Think about the implications of that. But we'll continue on. So he talks about the human brain being the biological storage unit of the information that is the soul, and that it's unreliable. He says the brain is difficult to maintain and requires food, lodging, clothes, a good environment, and education, etc. To support the brain and body, humans spend about 99% of their time and energy, and eventually what knowledge is gained is taken to the grave in death. There is only one solution to this problem: rewrite all of the brain information, our soul, in a more strongly based storage. We must also give the soul the possibility to acquire and manipulate information from the world. This means we must give sensors to the soul, so it may have communication and contact with people and other intelligent beings. We must give the soul a mobile system, for example, legs, systems for working, for example, hands, etc., thus giving the soul a new body in which to live. And he has the word live all in caps here, folks. The reader may ask, these ideas seem interesting, but how does one rewrite a human soul to live within a new carrier, for example, in electronic chips? Going to pause for a moment. So now he's talking about this notion of actually making a model of a person, a data model, a computer simulation of a person, essentially, and being able to transfer that into some other container. You'll notice he's using words like container, carrier, and at some point I think he even uses the word vehicle here. And these are all important ideas. You'll notice he used the word shell earlier on, and we talked about this notion of the world of shells. There are esoteric and occult underpinnings that are inherent in a lot of this, and I don't suspect this guy maybe was necessarily read into any of this occult knowledge. Seems like he was one of the useful idiots, the technocrats, which fall beneath the auspices and control of these dark occultists who run things in this world, and was maybe fulfilling his purpose in trying to design a method or a means of quantifying the soul and obtaining a means of recording this and using it in some material way. And certainly that's what this patent is all about. So he continues here, he says, the main problem with electronic immortality, rewriting brain information, the soul, to electronic chips, is that it's impossible to do this with the current technology we have. I'm going to pause for a moment. Now he's talking about 2004 technology. And we'll see as we continue here that these things that he was saying were impossible in 2004 are very possible now, today, in the year 2025. He says, at present, scientists are working to solve this problem. They know that the brain has about 15 billion neurons, and every neuron has about 10 connections to neighboring neurons. Neurons gain signals from neighboring neurons, produce signals, and then send these signals to other neurons. As a result, humans are able to think and find solutions. On the basis of this way of thinking, humans can come to solutions without exact data. Concepts of brain were described in his previous article, he says here. He says, for example, see the article titled Locate God in Computer Internet Networks. Or also another article, Science, Soul, Heaven, and the Supreme Mind. And those were the names of some of the articles he gives as a connection here, as an attachment with his patent application. He says, see also my articles on the internet and references at the end of this article. So I'm going to pause for a moment. Now remember, we're going back to 2004. The internet, in essence, was still very much in its infancy at that point. The internet as we know it today was much different then. It was not as sophisticated or large or complex as it is today. It's become a part of our everyday lives today. Back then, that wasn't the case. It was more of a novelty. We didn't really use our computers and the internet in 2004 the same as we do today. In fact, if I remember back in the year 2004, I don't even think I had internet at that point in my house. It wasn't an essential part of our everyday lives. It was a novelty. It was something that maybe you only used on a rare occasion for some certain purpose or another. But we didn't do online banking and online everything like we do today. It was a different time back then. We didn't have these sophisticated cell phones in our pockets, or are essentially computers. Back then, I think I had a pager at that point, back in 2004, when I'm thinking back to these things. Or if I did have a phone, it was one of those very unsophisticated flip phones. Even the cell phone network was in its infancy at that point, too. Now, think about that, and think of how far we've come over the course of these past 21 years since the writing of this. And what he's talking about here. But let's continue. So he says, scientists are learning how to take individual neurons on microelectrodes and record their impulses. Gonna pause for a moment here. This was in 2004. Now, perhaps he's referring to some programs that really weren't out in the public just yet at that point. This is not something that was highly talked about back then. The ideas of scientists are very simple. Study how single neurons and small neuronal networks work, and then model them by computer. They hypothesize that if we can model 15 billion neurons in a computer, they will learn how the brain works, and then they will have artificial intelligence equaling the human brain. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. I think they were wrong about that. It doesn't quite equal up to the human brain, but certainly we've seen some large strides in artificial intelligence advancements since then. And he's talking about the mapping of individual neurons. Human brain models, and certainly we've seen these initiatives have been going on for a very long time, since at least the early 1990s. We have seen brain emulation models being constructed. You could go back and look at documentation of this. If you go back and you look at the Future of Warfare 2025 document that was put out by NASA, at a meeting in 2001 they talked about such things. They talked about the Human Brain Project, years before the Obama administration introduced it. It existed, was already underway back then. Think about that. Now, this guy is talking about things that were also underway that most people probably hadn't heard about at that time, nor was it probably publicly disclosed at that time. He's talking about modeling individual neurons and connections in some type of a human brain project. Let's read on here. He says, in his previous work, he shows that this is a dead-end direction for human immortality. It's true that we'll create an artificial intelligence that will be more powerful than the human mind. However, it will be his AI and a new entity altogether. Our purpose is focused on preserving the concrete person now, more exactly his soul, in a new body in order to achieve immortality. I'm going to pause for a moment here. So now he's claiming that just simply attempting to duplicate the human brain electronically or artificially is a dead-end direction, and we need to actually develop an artificial intelligence, a superior one, that we can transfer our soul, this information, that is the constituent of our experience and learning in this place, into that. And that is the way forward. So he's talking about the purpose being focused on preserving the concrete person, the soul, in a new body in order to achieve immortality. A new, superior body. The Ubermensch, the Superman, the post-human. Let's read on. Why is it impossible to directly write the information of the human brain onto a chip? Because the human brain is constantly changing, and neurons permanently change their states. Imagine you want to record the state of a working computer chip. The chip has millions of logical elements which change their state millions of times per second. It is obvious that if you write in series, one after other, the current state of the chip, it is impossible to instantly write all states of the chip's elements. To instantly write all neurons, one would need to insert a microelectrode into every neuron. This would destroy the human brain before the writing was complete. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. And this was actually talked about by Nick Bostrom in a paper on whole brain emulation. They talked about actually doing this. rewriting each neuron in the human brain, but in the process it would destroy the brain. So they talked about a way to do that would be, as they rewrote each one, it would create an artificial new connection or neuron in its place, and it would preserve the information in the brain in a new artificial brain instead. It would completely replace the biological brain. So this is one approach that was talked about also. And we covered a bit of that paper not too long ago in an episode. But here is Bolonkin's answer to that. He says, I offer another method for the solution of the main problem of immortality. And then he continues and it says, the modeling of the soul for a concrete person. As said, straight rewriting of a human mind or human soul to computer chips is very complex. Straight rewriting is not possible in the near future. All scientific works studying the work of human brains at the present time are useless for the main problem of immortality. They are also unworkable for the problem of artificial intelligence in the near term, because the brain solves problems by way of general estimations. AI solves problems based on more exact computation and logical data. Going to pause for a moment here, folks, and now he's making a very important distinction here between these two processes, and of course, he's showing you his hand as to who he is in doing this. So he's reasoning here, and he's not necessarily wrong, that the human brain solves problems by way of general estimations. But AI uses very specific and exact data to solve problems. So what's he talking about here? Well, this is the very application of cybernetics methodologies to the problem. Cybernetics approaches the whole system, takes a look at the overarching big picture rather than specific little key components to the picture. Now, this is the distinction between the working of the human being and the machine. The machine looks at specifics. It categorizes everything down to minute detail. The human being looks at the big problem and comes up with a feasible solution, usually much more rapidly. One that works. Might be imprecise in its application, but it gets results. Whereas the more data-driven AI would have to consider all possibilities and all the minutiae of detail involved in order to arrive at a satisfactory conclusion. It's the difference between the compartmentalization approach that we've been taught in our education system, or our specialties that we've been taught in the education system, and looking at the big picture and applying solutions in terms of the big picture. This is the major difference, and this is the major disconnect between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And this is the bridge that they're trying to gap here. And this is certainly what Bolonkin is referring to. So he's showing his hand as a cyberneticist, looking at the big picture, saying that all of these eggheads who are looking at all these different biological minutiae of functions in the human body, and all of these other eggheads looking at the whole notion of trying to precisely use artificial intelligence programmed with minute detail and everything else to get things done and taking all angles into consideration is a dead end. That's his viewpoint. It's impractical on the face of it. That's what he's essentially saying here. It's impractical, and it's unwieldy, and it's not going to get results. If we want results in the near term, you have to use cybernetics methodologies to get it done. And that's what's been done in many regards here. So let's read what he says here. Bolonkin says, to solve the main problem of immortality, the author offers a method of modeling the soul of a concrete person. This method does not require interventions into the brain of a given person. This method may be applied immediately at the present time, but an accurate modeling is needed depending on the modeling period. Before describing this method, let us analyze the human soul and what components are important for each person and his environment. All information in the human brain, also known as the soul, may be separated in two unequal groups. Number one, the first of these unequal groups would be memory, or permanent knowledge about the person's life. All that has been seen, heard, made, felt, people which he has met, his or her brain behaviors, opinions, wishes, dreams, programs of activity, etc., their environment, and all of those other considerations, every detail. And number two, aside from memory, you also need methods of processing this information, i.e., producing new solutions and new behaviors based on this knowledge. So he continues here and he says, the first part, knowledge, is very large. It fills most of the memory and remains relatively constant. You remember your life, your history, and you can only fill it by what was in the past. The second part, methods for deciding, producing solutions based in your knowledge, is relatively small and constantly changing because of new information, facts, and life experiences. However, the most important part of a human soul can be written without any problem now. I'm going to pause for a moment. He's talking in the year 2004. He's saying, the most important part of a human soul can be written and recorded now, or modeled now, 21 years ago. Industry is producing cheap micro video recorders as small as a penny, microphones at grain size, and microsensors for vital signs, breathing, palpitation, blood pressure, skin resistance, perspiration, movement of body parts, etc. These measurements allow for easy recording of not only the physical state, but of his moral state, which would be joy, pleasure, grief, trouble, anxiety, nervousness, etc. For example, lie detectors are able to define not only the state of a man, but also the truth of his words. Now we can measure and record brain commands, and we can produce small cards with 4 gigabytes of memory. I'm going to pause for a moment. 4 gigs back in 2004. Look how far we've come now. Look how far we've come now. So he's talking about 4 gigs of memory then. Could you imagine in today's modern world with the prevalence of data and data storage? 4 gigs does not go very far, but we have far beyond that capacity now. Now think about that, because he's talking about this being feasible back then. So he says, it would be easy to attach a video recorder and microphone to a man's forehead, and then attach sensors to the body and record all that he sees, hears, speaks, his feelings, reactions, and activity. And then rewrite this information into a personal hard drive, a long-term memory of high-capacity storage, at the end of each day. As a result, there is a record of the most important part of our soul, history of life, feelings, environment, behaviors, and actions. This would be more detailed than what is captured by the real man, because the human forgets many facts, feelings, emotions, and personal interactions. The electronic memory would not forget anything in the past. It would not forget any person or what they were doing. But what about the second, smaller part of the human soul? Producing solutions based on personal knowledge? Perhaps, asks the meticulous reader about this. This could be restored by using past information from the real man in similar situations. Moreover, an electronic man could analyze more factors and data in order to throw out and exclude actions and emotions that happened under bad conditions. The electronic man, named the E-being or E-man in his previous works, would have a gigantic knowledge base and could, in a matter of seconds, write to his brain, produce the right answer much faster than his biological prototype. That means he would not have the need for the second, smaller part of memory. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. But is that the ontological self, the I am in man, the spirit? No, it's not. You see how he totally disregards this notion of spirit. He's talking simply about soul, not spirit. Notice the distinction here. Like I said, this very much to me speaks of the world of shells talked about by the Hermeticists and the Kabbalists. This world devoid of spirit, of the spirit of God, the spirit of man, any type of spirit at all, the divine spark, all gone, and just gross physicality only exists. Now, could you potentially record information in this way? I guess it could be done, and you could model information, but it's a cheap knockoff. It's a wholly artificial system, a completely synthetic system with no life. It is devoid of life. It is anti-life. There is no life in this system. And this, in and of itself, is a massively important thing in the study of esoterica and the occult. The life essence. What is it? This is not it, ladies and gentlemen. This is the antithesis of the essence of what life is. This, in my estimation, is not the destiny of mankind. Essentially, what the transhumanist philosophy and singularity would bring into manifestation would be an extinction event of all life. Not just human life, but all life. And you can most certainly see the allegorical representations of this not only in our ancient mythology, but in some of the more modern mythologies that we have adopted in our culture and society in the Western world. And I'm speaking more specifically about stories we hear out of the ufology movement, stories about alien worlds where they lack this life principle, where they've eliminated all other life forms off of their worlds. This is what they claim. Some of these people that claim to have had alien contacts, or to have learned some things from government programs or such things, they learn that some of these extraterrestrial beings, when they advanced in their intelligence and advanced in their culture, they wiped out all the other living things off of their own planets that didn't serve them, all the other animals or anything that may have existed naturally there, so that they were the only species left. You see all of this stuff modeled in those archetypes. Let's put it that way. It's this anti-life philosophy. This world is run by a giant death cult, ladies and gentlemen. It's all death-based ideas. Just look at our society, how some of these things have permeated into our culture without you even realizing it. Look at the language. What's a corporation? Corporation, the root word corpse, it's based on a dead entity. It's a dead entity system. We exist as a legal fiction. The all capital letters on your driver's license. A legal fiction, another dead entity. The straw man identity. These are all ideologies that have been introduced into our culture on purpose. Let's put it that way. It's a slow roll towards this anti-human, anti-life agenda that is this transhumanist agenda. But let's go ahead and we'll read on here before we close it out. So, considering the environment and friends, the following is an important part of a man's soul. His relationship with parents, children, family, kin, friends, known people, partners, and enemies. This part of his soul will be preserved more completely than even his prototype. Temporary factors will not influence his relationship with his enemy and friends as it would happen with his former prototype. I'm going to pause for a moment. So now he's calling the human being, as he exists biologically today, a prototype. An inferior prototype. Think about this. The hubris of these people. This is exactly what the transhumanist philosophy teaches. They talk about this. They say that religion is a precursory state to transhumanism. That's what the transhumanists teach. That transhumanism is the fulfillment of religious ideologies. It's the perfection, the next step forward, the advancement of man. The next step in human evolution, stepping out, overcoming our shortcomings and our inabilities and the physical limitations of our bodies. That's what they claim. Let's continue reading here, though. Bolonkin continues, and he says, there is one problem which may be troubling for some. If we were to record every part of a person's life, how do we keep intimate moments a secret? There are or will be ways to protect private information which could be adapted from current usage. For example, the use of a password known only to you. I'm going to pause for a moment here. Was Bolonkin really this naive? Did he really think passwords and such would be unhackable? I don't think so. I think this is all kind of a deception as well. They have no intention of having anything ever be private. Privacy is no longer existent in this world, ladies and gentlemen. The only privacy you have, which might not even really be an accurate statement right now, is in your thought life. And even that is probably something that has already been hacked in some sense. They're talking about actually being able to read thoughts with technologies, and it seems they may have been able to do that already. Consider advertisements that come across your social media. Did you ever think about something, not really even say anything about it, or mention it to anybody, and all of a sudden there's an advertisement for something like that coming across your Facebook feed or something? I've been talking about this for a long time. I did a presentation back in 2019 in New York City talking about that. And I heard gasps in the room when I mentioned about these very technologies that existed even then in 2019, far longer than that probably, where they can use the blue light of the computer screen to read your thoughts. It's not science fiction. So how much privacy really exists? Well, essentially none. Your cell phone collects data on you. Every electronic device everywhere collects data on you. There are so many points of metadata out there on individuals that these algorithms run by the computers know more about you than you know about yourselves, and they can make predictions with 99% accuracy as to where you'll be and what you'll be doing 5 years from now, exactly down to the detail. That's how sophisticated many of these algorithms have become, and the predictive capability of these machines. And these have been weaponized against us. But I've got good news. You could throw a wrench in the works. That's what I seek to do. I don't want to be one of their statistics. But at any rate, let's get back to the reading here. He says, also, there may be some moments that you choose not to record information or decide to delete the information from memory. Oh, so now you could have a selective memory on things, too. Isn't that nice? But somehow, somewhere, that information is never going to get lost. Think about that. Then he continues. He says, the offered system may become an excellent tool for defense against lies and false accusations. You may give the password in one given moment of your life, which proves your alibi or absence from the accusations. Gonna pause for a moment. Was Bolonkin really that naive? Honestly. Makes you wonder. This was one of those great scientific minds. Don't forget. Some people want to have better memory. Video takes 95% of storage capacity. Sound takes 4%, and the rest takes 1%. In usual situations, video can record only separate pictures, sound only when it appears. This type of recording practice decreases the necessary memory by tens of times. By every 1.5 to 2 years, chip storage capacity doubles. There are systems which will compress the information and then may select to record the most important information, as is done in the human brain. During your life, the possibility to record all information will be available for all people. This type of recording apparatus will be widely available and inexpensive. It's possible now, this is as of 2004, the most advanced video recorder, or DVD, writes more information than a CD. Gonna pause for a moment. So the state of the art in 2004 was a DVD, ladies and gentlemen. How far have we come since then? Now think about that and apply these same rationales to our modern state of technology. He was saying this was possible in 2004. And here we are. And it's much more plausible now. So he says, the solution, recording of human souls, is possible and must be solved quickly. By mass production or large production capacities, the apparatus will become inexpensive. The price will drop to about $300 to $1,000. Gonna pause for a moment. He's not far off, is he? That's about the price you would pay for a standard cell phone these days, isn't it? The newest, latest model of the iPhone, or the newest Android model, somewhere between $300 and $1,000, right? Are you beginning to pick up what I'm putting down here? Your cell phone is a major portion of this, ladies and gentlemen. You see, there are some in this world that would argue that we are already cyborgs because of our use of this tool in our daily life, our connection to it. Are they wrong? Not necessarily. So Bolonkin was pretty spot on with the pricing, how much this would cost. He continues, he says, if we work quickly, we can begin recording and then more fully save our souls. The best solution is to begin recording in children when they become aware of the I within themselves, capital I. But middle-aged and older people should not delay. Unrecorded life periods may be restored by pictures, memories, notes, diaries, and documents. Soul recovery will only be partial, but it's better than nothing. These records will also be useful in your daily life. You can restore recorded parts of your life, images of people's, relatives, and then analyze and examine your actions for improvement. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into the last portion we're going to cover here tonight before we sign off. This is quite a lengthy document where he lists out the specific notions of this invention. But this last portion will say it all to you as to what the intention and the spirit behind this is. This portion, it says, disadvantages of biological men and biological society. People understand Darwin's law, survival of the fittest. For a single person, this law is the struggle for his or her personal existence, his life, well-being, satisfaction of requirements, pride, etc. In a completely biological world built on Darwinian law, the strongest survives and reaches his goal. Though they may be intelligent, humans are members of the animal world. They operate as another animal in accordance with animal instincts of self-preservation. If one is poor, at first he struggles for food. Currently, half of the world's population is starving, he says in parentheses. Dwelling in better living conditions. When one reaches material well-being, he may struggle for money, job promotion, reputation, renown, power, attractive women or men, and so on. Most people consider their activities, including official work, in only one way. What will I receive from it? Only a small number of people are concerned with the idea of sacrificing themselves to the well-being, seldom giving up their life, of society at large. As a result, we see human history as a continuation of wars, dictatorships, and repression of people by power. Dictators kill all dissidents and opponents. Most people try to discriminate against opponents and play dirty against their enemy. There are murderers, rapes, violence, robbery, underhand actions, fraud, and lying at all levels of society, especially in lesser developed countries. Each person only cares for himself and his family and does not care how his actions affect other people or society. Democratic countries try to cultivate a more civilized society. They create laws, courts, and have police. Dictator regimes, on the other hand, make only the law they want. I could give thousands of examples to verify this concept. But hundreds of millions of people are killed by war, aggressive campaigns, repressions, genocides, and thousands of criminals in the everyday world are a good illustration of this. The human brain allows us to reach great success in science and technology. However, as a biological heritage struggling for his individual existence in a bloody, dangerous world, humans spend much of their resources on mutual extermination of intelligent beings. Moreover, humans have created ever-powerful weapons, for example, nuclear and hydrogen bombs, which could wipe out humanity. In time, existence may depend on the volition of one man, perhaps the dictator of a nuclear state. The second significant drawback to the biological body is that it spends 99.99% of its effort and resources simply to support existence, such as food, lodgings, clothing, sex, entertainment, relaxation, environment, ecological compatibility, etc. Only a very small part is used for the development of science and new ideas and technology. The reader may see something wrong here. States use a percentage of their revenue for research into science and technology. This percent is used not for new ideas, but is used to commercialize modern processes. All research is included in the state budget under the name Science and New Technology. But much of this research has little relation to real new scientific progress. Even in the U.S., states spend only a small part of their assigned money on new science because state officers do not understand the research. People, organizations, and companies fight for a piece of the pie. Geniuses are rarely and usually don't have the capacity to move forward because they must promote and pay for new ideas from their own empty pockets. Yet science and technology has seen success. Most advancement, 90%, was made recently in the 20th century, when governments started to finance a few scientific projects compared with the millions of years of human existence. However, our current knowledge and new technologies are far from what we will eventually have. The first government of an industrialized country to understand and realize the leading role of new science and innovation will become powerful. And now, electronic society. This is the crux of the matter. This is what he's pushing for. This is what he's talking about when he's talking about the development of new science and technology, the electronic society. Let's close it out after this. The electronic society will be a society of clever electronic beings, or e-beings, or e-men, as they were named in his past articles. Most of the reasons and stimulus which incite men to crime will be absent in e-beings. E-beings will not need food, shelter, sex, money, or ecology, which are the main factors in crime. E-people will not have intense infatuations or be distracted by behaviors because they will have vast knowledge about the open electronic society. Their main work will be in science, innovations, and technologies. They will save their mental capacity for the production of chips and bodies, scientific devices, experimental equipment, spaceships and space stations, etc. They will need a number of robots which do not need a big brain. It is likely they will award these robots better minds and memory. It is also likely that E-Man will unite in a common distributed hyper-brain, which will become a sovereign of the universe, and it says in parentheses, God. Gonna pause for a moment here. So if you think I'm an alarmist about this whole transhumanist thing, listen to the next words that are written in this patent, this official patent that was granted in 2009 after 5 years of this guy fighting with the red tape and bureaucracy to get it done. Listen to what he says next. Nature is infinite, and the development of a superbrain, or God, will not be limited. On the other hand, biological people will have limited mental capabilities. It will be difficult for them to image or imagine and predict the development and activity of super beings which we will generate. Many, especially religious people, object because they say electronic beings will not have human senses such as love, sympathy, kindness, humanism, altruism, and the capacity to make mistakes, etc. E-beings are not people. Look back at human history. Human history shows that kindness played a very small role in human life. All human history is the history of human vices and human blood, struggle for power, authority, impact, money, riches, territory, and states. All human history is filled with fraud, underhanded tactics, and trickery. Ordinary people were only playthings, flocks of sheep for the tyrants and dictators. Gonna pause for a moment. This guy has a very, very low opinion of humanity, doesn't he? You'll find this present throughout all of these transhumanists, all of these atheists, all of these agnostics, all of these eggheads that consider themselves superior or elite to you and I, the technocracy, the useful idiots of the dark occultists who run things, ladies and gentlemen. This is who they are. This is what they believe. This is what they espouse. They think they will be God. They are wrong. It is a lie. Let's finish this out. Some people object that with an electronic face, humans will lose the joy of sex, alcohol, narcotics, appreciation of art, beauty, nature, etc. My answer to this question, Bolonkin says, is in his article called Science, Soul, Heaven, and Supreme Mind. Supreme Mind. The brief answer is that electronic humans will enjoy all this in a virtual world or virtual paradise. Time will run millions of times faster in the virtual world. E-Man will spend a few seconds of real time and live millions of years in the paradise. He will enjoy any delight imaginable, including sex with any beautiful woman or handsome man he wants, feeling the emotions of any commander, leader, criminal, or even a dog. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So you may have heard me say in the past that this is what the transhumanists promise people. You can exist in whatever type of container or realm you want. You could be whoever or whatever you want. You could live forever in a machine. In a virtual world, you could live in some other container or body, should you choose. This is the notion. Do you see the low opinion of mankind given by these people, as is, and how they think they're so sophisticated, so much smarter than you and I? This guy really thinks that man, the consciousness of man, the soul of man is nothing more than information contained in the brain, and that it can be duplicated, rewritten on a computer chip, and you could live forever in that way and exist in some type of virtual reality world or some such thing. This is the Singularity blueprint, ladies and gentlemen. They have sophisticated supercomputers that they have been using in secret and also publicly for quite a long time, rendering models of each and every individual in the world in a simulation. In their computer simulations, they run different scenarios on these computers. One such computer exists at Purdue University. It's called Sentient World Simulation. Look it up. It's been in operation for a long time. It utilizes a D-Wave adiabatic quantum computer. And there are military-grade operations that have been simulated on that. There are classified portions of the project that are still not disclosed to the public that are run through that computer at Purdue University. And they claim they can make models of each and every individual in the world as an individual node in these models that they put together for various reasons. We're sitting at the precipice, ladies and gentlemen, of the rollout of this whole transhumanist philosophy en masse in this world. Be prepared, be ready, be mindful. Don't sell your soul to the computer. Let's put it that way. They very much want to achieve these ends. They have the technology. It's just a matter of implementing it on a grand enough scale right now. If they could convince enough people to buy into it, well, then they will begin their great culling. You see, even pro-transhumanists admit that's what it's about. They will tell you in their own words that transhumanism is eugenics without coercion. They'll try to convince you you can live forever in some virtual reality. Or on some kind of an electronic cloud. In an electronic cloud somewhere that you could transfer to whatever vessel you want to. Your consciousness could reside and live forever in that way. But it's a lie. It's all a lie. Basically, all this will do is it will convince people en masse to allow themselves to be culled and have a cheap computer knockoff of their personality duplicated in a machine somewhere. That is all. There's no life in that world of shells that these transhumanists are bound and determined to build. That's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now.